WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and conversation, and certainly horse racing conversation, and we've done a ton of that around here. But a story snuck onto my Twitter feed a few days ago, and before the weekend, it was kind of quietly into the weekend. And I don't know that everybody in Baltimore saw this story. Dave Sheinin has been my friend for, I don't know, about a quarter of a century now. He's been covering all sorts of sports for the Washington Post. We met on the Orioles beat back when I was a real journalist, not like a fake journalist, which I am now. And he's been at the Post covering the Olympics and all sorts of stuff. And he actually has an album out now that I'm going to talk to him about. But and we've talked about Sochi and being halfway around the world and Brazil and Olympics and all sorts of weird stuff, Dave Sheinin. And certainly you and I have had a pop over baseball and the intellect of Peter Giangelos over the course of times. But this Jim Palmer thing's the damnedest thing I've seen, and I'm just going to let you story tell it because anybody can go to Washington Post and read it. But the story, your story around the story, like if this were a Playboy interview, there'd be like a 2-page how I found this thing before you actually write the story first person. So I'm giving you that opportunity to go first person here, you know?
Well, I tell you, it's been a long, long time that I've been working on this. I want to say I started somewhere around 2003 working on this. Palmer, I was covering the Orioles at the time for the Washington Post, and had gotten to know Palmer pretty well, of course, and had some dinners with him on the road and stuff like that. And
by the way, I really like Jim Palmer. Before I even get going with this, I have differences of opinion. Jim Palmer, anytime he's ever seen me, has let me know that what the Orioles have done to me is wrong. And, for that, I've always respected Jim for that. And I love watching games when Jim's on, man. I am the biggest Jim guy you'll ever meet. We did a Baltimore, a best athlete in the history of Baltimore thing here a decade ago, and he was number one, by far, the greatest athlete in the history of Baltimore sports for me. So before we even go there, I believe that because I saw him pitch,
Right,
so there you have that. So I think that's not he's not fully credited in that way, the way he should be in the Unitas, Ray Lewis, Joe Flacco, modern John Ogden era, that how good he was, Kids don't know these days,
Yeah, no question. So, he dropped on me at one point, the adoption story to the extent that he knew it. And the one nugget that obviously intrigued me, as it would anybody, was the fact that his uncle, who had accompanied his his adopted mother, to pick him up as a baby, as a 2-day-old baby, had noticed the name Kennedy either on the birth certificate or on the crib or whatever, and had relayed that information to Jim, years later. So there was this weird Kennedy connection. And in Jim's mind, that sort of, always led him to think, what if I was, part of the Kennedy clan? And obviously, when I heard that, I was very, very intrigued. My journalist radar is just going nuts. So I spent some time looking into it with his permission. He signed some, documents for me. We got them notarized to go looking for the birth certificate, all this stuff. Long story short, we ran into roadblocks because this was the pre-DNA testing days. He had a name change at age 11 from Jim Weason, which was the name of his adopted family, to Jim Palmer at age 11 because that was the name of his stepfather after his adopted father died. So long story short, we couldn't get the name change documents, and without that, we couldn't get the birth certificate, and without the birth certificate, we could not get the adoption record, so the trail went cold. I gave it up for, 10, 12 years. And finally, Susan Palmer marries Jim, 12 years back, has always had it in her mind to look into this at some point. And finally, last fall, she said, I'm doing this. And she got on these ancestry websites, and she used DNA samples from Jim and matched them up with others, and one thing led to another, and boom, within a few months, she had the birth parents, and I got back involved in the story. She had used some of my research, my old research, as a starting point, and so we had always stayed in touch about it. And then this thing got really hot over the fall and in the spring, and she's still finding out information. She's still out there beating down the bushes to track down information about the birth parents. So it's an ongoing situation. But the story is unique. A 72-year-old Hall of Famer goes all the way into his life, 72 years, and never knows the identity of his birth parents, and then through the efforts of his wife, suddenly finds out this huge mystery at the age of 72. I think it's a great story.
Well, you can go read it at WashingtonPost.com. You can follow Dave Sheinin as well. I would just say this. First of all, I was adopted, and my parents, took in foster children at various points in my childhood because their son had drowned in 1969. And I also have a really close friend of mine who has done all of this lineage because he was adopted. I know who my parents are, but I would think of that era. It wasn't talked about, right? Like, especially right. Jim. I mean, we're talking about a whole generation before me, where the records and the privacy part of it, there was no interweb to be going out and linking all this stuff together. That it's a little bit of a needle in a haystack kind of a miracle, right? When these things connect, but that's what DNA does at this point. And my wife's life was saved from halfway around the world on DNA. So we're sort of familiar with it, but it is way beyond the level of the kinds of research that I would even know where to start. Right? Like, what stopped you? What made it a dead end for you as a reporter back in the day?
Well, I think it was just failing to get the documents.
But that's the government, right? Like, it's a governmental issue or a hospital issue. What is it?
No, it was governmental. I mean, and it also could have been a situation where at age 11, this would have been 1956, when Jim went and changed his legal name from Jim Weason to Jim Palmer because his mom married a man named Max Palmer and he wanted to take the name of his stepfather. It's possible they never filed the official paperwork. It's possible that the paperwork was missing, lost, burned in a fire. There's just no telling. But for whatever reason, that paperwork did not seem to exist in the state of Arizona, which is where the name change occurred. Now, the birth certificate and the adoption records would be in New York, but, without the proper documentation of the name change, I couldn't get to any of that. So I just ran into, I guess, bureaucratic red tape and dead ends.
I guess the fallout of all this is I've been a fan of Jim Palmer forever, like since birth, literally. I didn't know he was adopted, right? I mean, I knew he could play tennis left-handed. I knew he could say. I knew some things about his background as an athlete and whatnot. And obviously, he's been a public figure all of my life here and been on my television set. Some weeks I wish it were 7 nights a week and not just once or twice in the modern era. But in the case of him, I don't know that fans knew much of any part of this, and I guess that speaks to the privacy of athletes back in the day now. I mean, now if someone's adopted, it's the first thing you hear on the day of the draft or whatever, right? Like, that we follow these athletes from cradle to grave, kind of, sort of, in a way where back in that era, to say you were adopted was probably not something you talked to a reporter about in 1968, nor probably was it something that a reporter would write about, right?
Yeah, I imagine so. He never really hid it. He didn't talk much about it, but on certain occasions he was out there publicly with it. I know that he went on the old Sally Jesse Raphael show in the 1980s or maybe in the 90s on a panel and talked about being adopted. So he didn't run from it or hide it, but he just had no curiosity at all about the identity of his birth parents. He felt like, he said to me, your real parents are the ones who raised you, the ones who took you to Little League games. And for him, that was, his mother, Polly, who had 2 husbands, Weason and Palmer, and those were his parents. Those were his fathers. He had no interest in tracking down any of this other stuff. So, it was not well known, but it was not a secret.
Well, the weirdest part for me is at this age, they're gone, right? So he's never really going to find, his parents and say hello, right? So I think it's a different thing when you're 20 or 30 and you're on that search and thinking they might be alive or a sibling might be alive. And gosh, I've had that happen in my own family where there were, children born that no one knew. I mean, I think every family, if you have enough web, there are adoptions, all sorts of things that could happen along life's highway. But if you don't care about it for the longest time, And then you start to care about it. I don't even know where you begin, but I guess in the modern era, the Ancestry.com thing would happen. Where are you on the trail now of doing this? And you said this thing heated up for you last summer and into last fall. What does heating up mean? At what lengths do you go to figure out this information, to find the lineage of all of this?
Yeah, and let me just reiterate that this was all really Susan's work.
Okay.
Susan Palmer. She took what I had started on, all those years ago and used that as a starting point, but the DNA testing changes everything. So where I was running into bureaucratic dead ends, she was getting Jim Palmer to spit into a tube or whatever you do and send that off to be analyzed. And from there, you go online and you find people who have already entered their DNA and all their ancestry, and you find matches. And she started with one match that came back as like a high probability as a second cousin, tracked down this person who all you had was initials, and played the Hall of Fame card. Hey, don't you want to find out if you're related to Jim Palmer, the Hall of Fame pitcher? And yeah, most people are going to say, yeah. So they reached out back to Susan, realized that they were related as second cousins, and from there the ball got rolling, and Susan came across more relatives and got to the bottom of who was the mother and who was the father. But that's how it started.
It made me smile when the eyebrows, right? Like we're always looking for things in common, and I've got a long history with this here now over the 5 years with my wife, and with the DNA, they said that her match would look like her, that they would look like brother and sister, and damn if they don't. I mean, they literally were a perfect match, so there is no doubt they're related from worlds ago, and I tell that story and people's heads turn like, like spitting up the split pea soup back in the 70s in The Exorcist. People are like, that's crazy that this happens in the modern era, and I think these stories become a little bit more common where people find whatever they're looking for in regard to finding their lineage or their heritage. But for Jim Palmer to have gone all this time and for you to document and be a part of it, it really is the coolest story. Go to Washington Post. Go check it out with Dave Sheinin. Dave, you got an album, right? I mean, it's not often I can say to one of my fellow sports writers, your album's out now, right?
Album is out. It came out in late March. It's yeah, man. It's
I remember you sang opera, right? Like that was one of your you sang a lot of different stuff, but this isn't that, right? This is like your adult like rock and roll sort of poppy project, right?
Yeah, it's kind of power pop, kind of a little bit of Americana, a lot of rock and roll, some piano, ballady kind of stuff. The opera thing was just almost like a phase. I trained as an opera singer in college. For a brief time thought about pursuing a career in it, but haven't really done much with that other than like pull it out at a bar, every now and then to just freak people out or on the piano or whatever. But this is a rock and roll album, kind of power pop, very, very tuneful. And, just really well made. I had some amazing people working with me, some legendary Baltimore musicians, and I'm just thrilled with how it came out.
Who worked with you on it? Give me a little background on how the music came together, because Dave Sheinin is always here talking Olympics, and we'll get to how the Orioles suck in a minute, and how he's covering the Dodgers and the Machado trade. We'll get to all that, but I find this fascinating on a human level that at this point in your life you put the band together, literally, and did something. How many times I've talked about really learning the guitar and taking lessons and strumming it and picking along and singing in a band for a couple of years, and my wife was the Yoko Ono of my band, but, I found the band thing at 3 a.m. lugging equipment. That was really what made it not for me, right? Like, I found the rehearsal to be more fun than the gigs. You're not looking to like go around the world, and am I going to get a tour shirt or what's happening?
No, there's no tour. I mean, I'm really, I don't have either the inclination or certainly not the time to take on a tour. I mean, I'm much more interested in the creation and making the music than touring and performing. So
Steely Dan said that till there was money in T-shirts. Remember that now, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess everybody has their price, right?
Are you going to do gigs? Or tell me about the musicians first, because if they are local, why wouldn't there be a night where you and Justin Tucker get together and sing opera and play Bodine songs or Beatles tunes or something?
There could be one of those. I mean, we've talked about it, but these guys have their own careers, and we're not really a band. They're just friends and musicians who came and played with me on the record. The primary producer is Andy Bopp, who is a power pop legend from Baltimore. He fronted a band called Miracle Bra for a long time. He's, like I said, power pop legend. His output is amazing. He had a solo record last year that was, I believe TMD named it the best record of 2017. So that's Andy Bopp. He also played bass on the record. The main guitar player was Andrew Grimm, who's another legendary musician in Baltimore. He's an Americana, sort of alt-country type of guy. He fronts a band called June Star that also has a brand new album out. They're phenomenal, and he's probably the greatest songwriter that I personally know. And then the other producer and the guy whose studio we use, Magpie Cage, the producer was named James Robbins, who is a veteran and a legend in the DC, Baltimore hardcore scene. He was in a band called Jawbox that got a lot of MTV play in the 1990s.
I remember Jawbox. Absolutely.
Yeah, Jawbox, Burning Airplanes, Office. I'm forgetting the name of his latest band. He was in Government Issue for a while. He's just a legend. So, and he was the third producer on the record. So I had some amazing people helping me.
Dave Sheinin, he's got a great Jim Palmer story at the Washington Post. He's got a new album out that you can learn about out on his website, or excuse me, his Twitter at Dave Sheinin. That's Sheinin. He lives here in Baltimore, even though he's a Washington Post guy. And Dave, we've talked about Jim Palmer, we talked about your band and your tour shirts and all that stuff, but at some point the Orioles are going to come up. So this is this is where we get to the dour part of the look. I played some baseball over the weekend. It's fine. They're going to go to Boston this weekend. It's fine. But when you start a season like this, the season's over before it starts. I guess it's nice to see Hess throw the ball a little bit and find out all of this stuff, but David, who's running the place? I mean, I'm having Cafardo on later on here in the week, and he had a little takedown in the Boston Globe over the weekend. I'm sure you caught on who's running the place and who's running the place. And at what point is someone going to stand up and say, "I'm running the place"? Because as a fan, I'd like to know.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that's somewhat up in the air right now, and I'm sure there's some decisions being made. But even at the best of times, it was always kind of a collaborative thing where, Dan Duquette, Buck Showalter, Brady Anderson, Peter Angelos, the Sons, all involved in decision-making. And I'm sure to a certain extent that's still going on there. It's just that you're right now more or less minus Peter Angelos. So,
he had 99.9% of the vote. Let's be honest, right?
I'm sure, especially when it came to the purse strings, of course, that's going to be the case.
But to eliminate him is to eliminate. I mean, I'm trying to get my arms around him not being in. Like literally, if they could do anything they wanted, because I mean, it's such a wild card. I mean, it could be no prediction on any of this, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing that fascinates me and that I think eventually we got to get to the bottom of is how much say Brady Anderson has. He kind of has this weird hybrid job that I don't know of anybody else in baseball who has, which is partly as a front office guy with a lot of power and a direct line to ownership, but also a guy who's in the clubhouse, in workout clothes, working sort of as a quasi-trainer, nutritionist, working with players in the off season. It's a very interesting hybrid role, and I have to think that Brady Anderson is a major part of whatever configuration they decide on moving forward.
Yeah, and do you find that to be one of the more fascinating things after 20 years of watching this thing unfold? That, I mean, look, this family hasn't trusted much of anybody, over the course of time. That Brady Anderson becomes the guy who runs the whole place, and whether he's capable or what sort of weird sort of nepotism this is, and certainly, there's been a lot of pushback enough to create journalists being pulled aside to say, he's in here hitting fungos and guys are living at his house and he's working with pitchers and we don't know what the hell he's doing. There's been a lot of that's gone on the last 18 months here, right?
Well, it's not even that I don't know that they know what he's doing. It's just that he has a lot of different job descriptions that nobody else in baseball has all at once. I mean, there's not vice president of baseball operations out there, other ones that I know of, who are also, working individually with players on workouts and everything else. I mean, and that's not to say this can't work. It's just that it's different, and it sort of leads you to think that he is a guy with a lot of say and a lot of power in that organization, especially in this sort of leadership vacuum that has been created around Peter Angelos' absence.
If another team, and you're going to be with the Dodgers here this week, writing a piece, they're playing the Nationals, and scuffling team right now, and they have the injury to Seager. Maybe that's one of the reasons they're scuffling. Machado dangling out there, and we'll talk about this all summer, but where is the market, for him, and how does that develop to the point where somehow, some way, someone feels confident to get on the phone with the Baltimore Orioles and really believe that they're going to be able to pull off a deal?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes specifically to the Dodgers, I think at this point it's almost foolhardy to imagine him going there and pulling the trigger on a trade. Right now, they are so bad and in such bad shape that, they're not talking about being buyers at the trade deadline. I mean, they're looking at possibly being sellers at this point. They're so bad and so far out of first place. Although, the Diamondbacks have started to scuffle themselves, so that's changed a little bit. But, the market is going to be there for this guy. I just don't know that it's going to happen anytime soon. It's kind of counterintuitive. A team could get Manny Machado right now for May, and in May, and you'd have him for 2.5 more months than you would on July 31st. But at the same time, teams start to get desperate in July. They get closer to the finish line. They're in the hunt. So I really think that this thing is going to go, into July, if not all the way to July 31st before Manny Machado is traded.
Dave Sheinin is our guest. He makes rock and roll. He also wrote a great piece on Jim Palmer and his DNA and his birth parents and the search thereof at the Washington Post. You can also find him out on Twitter. Dave, I'm just going to leave the floor for you on the Orioles here. I mean, other than Machado, which is the obvious, and there's so much. Like, there's a lot of meat on this bone I'm giving you here. Duquette, Buck, Brady, Peters' health, who's going to run the team, the Masson lawsuit, the money, Bryce Harper. I mean, all of that factors into this. But what's on your mind first and foremost when it comes to the Orioles over, let's say, the next 90 days, now that it's not, well, I wonder if they can win a couple at Fenway this weekend, because none of that matters. Now it matters like how they're going to get back up onto their feet. And I think there are so many questions that I don't even know where to begin once we talk about Machado. I mean, I guess Adam Jones, is he going to get dealt?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the big question facing the organization, and I guess this is obvious, is this going to be a small downsizing where you trade the obvious guys like Machado, Brad Brock, Zach Britton if he shows he's healthy again, maybe even Adam Jones, although I think he has a special sort of category as, the face of the franchise for so many years. Or is this going to be a massive rebuild? Are you going to go and also trade Jonathan Scope, who you're only going to have for one more year? Are you going to trade maybe a couple of your top pitchers that other teams are going to covet down the stretch here, like Kevin Gossman, Givens, Bundy? Do you go all the way with this? Do you trade anybody who has any value whatsoever and just start over? I personally am in the camp of the latter. I mean, you might as well just blow this whole thing up. You don't have the farm system. You're not going to be ready to compete next year. You don't need to be fooling yourself. So, I trade anybody, within reason who has some value to another team down the stretch and just sort of start over.
Dave, I don't know if that would mean Dylan Bundy or who's safe here or Mancini or where they would go with any, what would be the nucleus of all of this. But if they're not going to give Scope $130 million, then you're going to be the same spot you were with Machado, right? That's where we're headed. And really, the big picture for me, having watched this all of my life now, and knowing that Hank Peters, Frank Cashin made trades, and Hank Peters made trades, and I remember Juan Bell and Manny Alexander. I remember the Glenn Davis fiasco and how that played out. But I also have looked in recent times and remember the Andy McPhail deals that brought Adam Jones and Chris Davis and Chris Tillman here, and the death maneuvering to be able to do that. I'm wondering who's going to be the one picking the Juan Bells and the Mandy Alexanders or the Adam Joneses for this team. And if that guy's Brady Anderson, I don't know that I have tremendous confidence in that, because he held on to Nolan Reimold about 3 years longer than he probably should have, and brought him back because they were buddies around California. I find the whole thing to be a little unsettling to who is picking that. Can we get Andy McPhail back here just to make the Machado trade? Because that, evaluating those players, that is the gift, right? That's the Theo Epstein gift. That's the Tampa Bay Rays gift back in the day, was identifying that sort of a talent in a trade. And if you can't do that, the organization's going to get set back even further, because I'm with you. Deal them all. I mean, it's the Titanic at this point.
Yeah.
Deal them all. But if you're dealing from the Sid Thrift hand that you remember very well, when the Will Clark BJ Suroff weekend, boy, that didn't work out so well, did it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the problem with this, is if you're gonna do this, and if you screw it up, you hurt yourself twice as much. So you've only got one shot at this, and it's something that needs to be done, but it has to be done well. And if it's not done well, then there's no point. So, I don't know that there is a great track record here to trust this current regime. I mean, I will say, Dan Duquette, for all that we've criticized him for, I mean, he is the guy who did build a team that has won went to the playoffs 3 times in his tenure. And granted, a lot of those players he inherited from the McPhail regime, but, does he deserve the benefit of the doubt here? I mean, if you're not going to retain the guy beyond this season, I don't know how you let him oversee a trade deadline rebuild and a draft next month. So there has to be some decisions made quick.
And that's usually not what they're good at, Dave.
Yeah.
Hey, man, love you, appreciate you, happy for all your success. You're all over my timeline. People listen to your tunes, and TMD's giving you shout-outs. I had Sam Sessa on 2 weeks ago talking about the things they did with the kids over at the Modell Lyric and the little masquerade deal they did 2 Saturdays ago. So trying to support the community endeavors around here and get your album sold. I want to see you on tour with the Stones in Europe sometime soon, all right?
Yeah. Okay, buddy. Yeah, just hold your breath for that.
All right. Well, maybe opening up for some cool act or something somewhere down the line, or getting you on a stage at Ramshead or something. All right.
All right, man.
All right. Well, I would pay to watch you do it. I really would. That's why I want to. I mean, pick a place in Fells Point or something. Come on, let's have some fun.
All right.
Let's go rock out a little bit. Go to the Cat's Eye or something. Dave Sheinin joining us here. He's at the Washington Post. Please go read his Jim Palmer story. If you love Jim Palmer, will shed new light. Certainly did for me. I've loved Jim Palmer from the beginning, as I've pointed out. I think he's the greatest athlete in the history of Baltimore sports. And, I'll take any argument, but you better bring your stats with you, because I watched him pitch. I mean, I would hear Ray Lewis, but that's about it. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Speaking of Ray Lewis, we are running a trip that includes baseball. We're going to be seeing the PNC Park, as well as Progressive Field. I call it the Jake in Cleveland, as well as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So perfect for Sheinin. There's baseball and rock and roll. It's perfect. And the Hall of Fame, and Ray Lewis, and lots of purple. So come on out with us. Oh, and Lamar Jackson throwing the football around on Thursday night in a meaningless game against the Bears. But it'll be fun, meaningless game, which is better than not fun, meaningless game, especially when you're paying for it. Nasty at WNST.net, the road trips tab at WNST.net for all of that. We're in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile devices. Download the TuneIn radio app. Listen from anywhere. Email me anytime, nasty at WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.